everyone, Kristina Werner here. Welcome to another video for assignmentsofstamp.com. Today I'm going to be using elements from the December 2019 card kit. I'm using the Gnome for the Holidays stamp set, which looks like this. It has a lot of fun gnome images with trees and snowflakes and presents. And I'm also going to be using the stencil that comes in the card kit. The stencil has a fun house and a tree, and it's called Christmas Gnome Home. I'm going to be using the stencil to kind of sketch on a watercolor background. Starting with some Strathmore watercolor paper, and this is the 5x7 pre-cut paper. And I'm going to use a pencil to sketch in the entire background scene that's going to go behind my gnomes. So I thought it would be kind of nice to have a house off to one side and then the tree next to it. So first I'm building the house. I use the bottom 3 lines of the house shape, and then I use the little scalloped rooftop, and I sketched that on. I also added the doorway as well as all of the windows right onto this little house image. Now today I'm going to be sketching the house and the scene and then painting it with some watercolors, but you could definitely use the blender brush that comes in the card kit to blend on inks onto paper to create this background. I think that would look really, really neat as well. I just wanted to do everything with watercolor for this card. So I'm sketching on those windows, and then I used the tree image off to the side, and I also added a chimney to the top of that house. The last thing to do is I'm just going to finish off some little elements. I've got a path leading up to the front door, and I also added some little Christmas bulbs onto the tree. I just used one of the little circle images on the stencil to add all of that. So here's my scene. It's very, very simple. I'm going to put it on a hardboard and tape it down because I'm going to be watercoloring this entire piece of watercolor paper. And I'm going to be using the Paper Fashion watercolor set from American Crafts. And I'm also going to be speeding up the painting process here and turning on some music. I'm doing very, very simple painting today, mostly just a few different colors. So I didn't want to overcomplicate things. And here we go. After all of the painting was finished and dry, I set it aside and worked on the two gnomes. There is a third image in the stamp set that has a tree, but since I had a tree in the background, I decided to only use the gnomes. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm stamping these gnomes onto some more Strathmore watercolor paper. This is the cold press watercolor paper, by the way. So I pressed those down to get a really good impression, and then I started painting them with the exact same set of watercolor paints. And I mostly wanted to paint these with reds and greens, so after I had their faces done with a little bit of pink on their cheeks for some blush, I went right into painting their outfits. I started with the one on the left, and I painted his hat a bright red. And I also added that same red down onto his legs in sort of a peppermint stripe pattern. And then I added green to the hat on the other gnome. Now these are Christmas gnomes, obviously, so these are all going to be in red and green. I painted the body of the gnomes. The one with the red hat, I wanted to have an alternating green body, and the opposite on the other gnome, so a green hat and red body. I did add just a little bit of shading on these by intensifying that green shade for the stripes on the hat, and I also added that on his legs. And as far as the shading goes on the one side, I just add a little bit of that green off to the left. And for the red hat, I actually brought in a brown, since brown tends to be a good color for shading over red. I painted those dots on the red hat with a little bit of a pale pink shade, and then I added some shading onto the beards of each one of these gnomes. I hit this with my heat tool to speed up the drying process because I'm going to be cutting these out, and I need them to be completely dry while I fussy cut around them. I'm cutting around each of these gnomes and leaving just a little bit of a white border around them just because those legs and arms are so skinny. I didn't think that they would be sturdy enough to hold up to what I have planned for my card. So I cut out both of these gnomes, and I just went around them very carefully. I slowed down. I didn't want to speed through this too much because that's when you get mistakes. While I had my watercolor paper out, this is just some of the paper that was left over after I painted the gnomes. I took the red shade from the watercolor palette and I painted a flat red background. This is going to be for my greeting. I wanted the red shade to match the red on the tree and also on the gnomes. So I took a sentiment from the stamp set that says Gnome for the Holidays, and I stamped it in Versamark ink. This is a very sticky ink, and it's perfect for embossing powder. I wanted my greeting to be white and a very, very bright white, so that's why I decided to heat emboss it. I sprinkled on some alabaster embossing powder from Burtis Monroe, and then heat set that until it was smooth and melted. I then removed my watercolor background scene from the board, and I ended up trimming it down just a little bit. Now this is going to be on a 5x7 card, so the final size of this background scene is 4.5 by 6.5, so it's half an inch shorter on each dimension. I then created a white card base that was 7 inches wide by 5 inches tall, and then adhered my watercolor background onto the front of that card. So now it's time to start assembling these gnomes on here. Now inside the card kit, you are given 3 mini action wobblers. I'm going to use 2 of them today. First, I'm going to place my greeting on here. I'm using some additional foam tape, and I put that up in the top left corner. When it comes to using these little action wobblers, what you want to do is make sure that you use the very thickest plastic part, which is not clear. You adhere that onto whatever you want to wobble. So I'm pressing it down onto the gnome, and then I can remove the release paper on the other side of the wobbler. And this side of the wobbler has clear plastic, and that's what's going to touch the background of my card. You do it this way so that if that little critter kind of moves around a little bit and the area underneath shows, that it's that clear plastic piece and it won't be quite as visible. Did the same for the other gnome, the hard plastic right up against the gnome, and then the clear plastic onto the background. And that finishes my card. You can see how cute these are when they kind of move around. They also stand up away from the surface of the card. You can pick up the December 2019 card kit over at simonstamp.com, and thanks so much for watching.